This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Hey, do you like free stuff? As a member of the operating crew, you'll get a chance to win awesome prizes each month. For less than a dime a day, you'll be entered to win, and just as important, your support helps keep every episode from behind a paywall and free of those unrelated and annoying commercials you hear on other podcasts. Sign up today at aroundthelayout.com/crew, and thank you for your support. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Lehigh Valley Harbor Terminal with Ralph Heiss. Ralph, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here, Ralph.
Appreciate it.
We connected sometime in late July, and we had chatted online about doing a show together, and it was right after you took a really epic rail fanning trip out to Crescent, PA.
Indeed.
And I was jealous as heck because you guys were having a great time out there and seeing a lot of action. Tell us a bit about it.
It was a great trip. It's a trip that my friend Dave Abeleys and a couple of other friends of his, since, gosh, they've been doing it since they were 17 years old. And I think all but two of them out of the original group haven't missed a year yet.
Wow.
Anyway, we take over the Station Inn in Crescent, Pennsylvania. Basically, it's pretty much what it comes down to. It's hours for about Wednesday till Sunday morning, and wow. It's just a great time. It's great camaraderie. Great rail fanning. We'll go on day trips to Horseshoe Curve. We'll go on day trips to, not even really day trips, just afternoon trips to Cassandra, to the Iron Bridge, to Bennington Curve. So and you don't have to do anything. You could just sit on the porch and drink beer and enjoy yourself and do nothing and just watch trains from the porch of the Station Inn, or you can go explore. Some of the guys this year, there were some new guys in the group, and they disappeared in the morning, and we didn't see them until dinner time because they went out on their own, rail fanning, just exploring in general. Most of us are all from Jersey, so we don't get out to that part of Pennsylvania all that much. So,
well, it's awesome. What an awesome tradition, and an awesome time to spend time with the guys and have your favorite beverage and just be able to enjoy the prototype. And like you said, all that camaraderie together. It's got to be an absolute blast. I was jealous. I saw the pictures, and you guys were catching a lot of great stuff, some heritage units, and just really cool tradition that Dave and his friends have built, and that's awesome that you're a part of that.
Yeah, it's nice to have been included, and I've been doing this now with them for the last 6 years. So I've been there for the 25th anniversary. I've been there for the 30th anniversary, which really honestly doesn't amount to much. It's just cool that I'm part of a tradition like that with them, and it's just a great bunch of guys. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. It was a really good year. This year, coal traffic was up, so there were a lot of coal trains. We usually always catch at least one heritage unit. I think this year we might have been 3. One of them came by twice. So,
cool.
Just the way Norfolk Southern turns engines around from major terminal to major terminal, you're probably guaranteed to see one twice while you're there.
That's awesome stuff. And speaking of Dave Abeleys, I've learned pronunciations of some of the New York State towns and areas while I'm out there. I've mastered Schenectady and Oneonta, and I still cannot say the name, and it's one of the struggles that I have. It's the Ogden. See, I already am trying to trip up as I'm starting to say it. Go ahead and say Dave's layout name.
It's the Onondaga cutoff, and that name comes from Onondaga. It comes from the Native American tribe that is originally from that region of New York State, and there's also a Lake Onondaga, I believe. I'm pretty sure
Yes,
there is.
there is.
Yes,
there is. Yeah, and that's an area out there. And boy, I'll have to one day. I'll tell you what. When this podcast comes out, I'll just keep listening to you say it over and over again, and eventually I'll be able to say it. But I know you're a regular operator on his layout, and that's another way that I've seen you. And I jokingly said the last picture I saw of you, you're wearing what looked like a bulletproof vest. I was like, boy, is it that rough over at Dave's that you gotta, but I guess that's your operating vest. And
well,
but you're having a great time over there as well. And I know that's part of the group that you run in.
yeah. So that all came from a offhanded remark that somebody made on the Model Railroad Hobbyist forums, and they joked about a tactical ops vest. It's great. It's got room for your car cards or your switch lists or your pen light, because Dave does run night sessions, or part of the session is always in dark. So I finally got smart and remembered to buy one of these things, and it's it holds that, and the canteen holster is great for your beer because we do not observe Rule G. I mean, it's not, if alcohol's not your thing, that's okay, but it is encouraged at Dave's house.
It just sounds like you guys have Dave looks like, just watch his videos and everything. It just seems like a whole lot of fun over at his place.
Dave has such a passion for the hobby, for the layout, for Conrail, and he's just a generally great guy to know. And even if you run into him at, like, say, the Springfield meet, in January, you'll come up and you'll meet him, and he'll be so happy to meet you. If you're a complete stranger, he'll make you feel like you're so welcome, and that he's known you forever, and vice versa. And the man loves to talk, and that's good. It also does well for him in his job at New Jersey Transit. But yeah, he's a great guy. I'm very, very lucky to have him as a friend.
Yeah, one of the very enthusiastic, one of the good people in the hobby, and definitely great to see the enthusiasm that he puts into it, and you get to be a part of that. So that's really cool.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky to live in New Jersey, especially the northern part of New Jersey, where we have had some phenomenal layouts that I've been involved in. Gosh, since I've been in operating layouts since I was about 17, 18 years old. And wow. I mean, normally I wouldn't say how old I am now. I'm 54, but for that long. So, a good couple decades, and we've unfortunately lost some gentlemen, and thus their layouts. Some unfortunately to going to the Great Roundhouse in the Sky, some because they moved.
Right.
But, I don't want to drop names, but I mean,
yeah, but it's great to be able to meet that many people where you have that problem. It's the cost of it, right? We get to meet all these awesome people. Unfortunately, we're humans, and we all pass on at some point, but it's really neat that you've been able to meet so many people and being part of that group down there in New Jersey.
Indeed. Yeah, no, and since I've gotten to go around the country with some of these guys, and I've gotten to meet and make friends of people in Kansas City and the San Francisco Bay Area and Chicago area. I mean, even for Northern Virginia, we do a thing where friends that know each other, this is the year we go down their way, and then next year they'll come up here, and we just do that back and forth. It's very informal, but it's a thing that we've done for a couple of years, and it's just great. You get to re-see certain people every year, which is nice, because normally we wouldn't see them at all during the year.
It's really amazing how this hobby networks, isn't it?
It is. I mean, of course, it's obvious that the internet and things like podcasting have opened up doors to people who otherwise, where they live or their own personality traits, the introverted people. I'm not exactly an extroverted type person, but for people like that, it just opens up this world. Even if they don't take advantage of getting actively involved, they can be virtually involved, and that's we didn't have you and I didn't have that growing up. We're
right.
We're of that age where
exactly
we didn't have any of this growing up. For you and me and Dave and many others, outlet to the world was Model Railroader or RMC, and that was pretty much it.
Or the local hobby shop.
Or the local
Yeah,
hobby shop, correct.
Yeah, and then you had to, have the right guy that would talk to you, and then introduce you to the right person, and slowly network. You may have mentioned it, but again, whether before or after the internet, or before or during the internet, it's really about sticking your neck out just that one time, and then it's just amazing how quickly it'll start to domino after that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've met a lot of different people with a lot of different kind of personalities through the year, and some, it's like anything else. It's like any other hobby. It's like you realize you meet somebody and it's like, but for the most part, it's a great hobby. It just begs to be, or it begs participation and whatnot. Because I mean, yeah, there are lone wolf modelers, and people build layouts that are just designed for them and their buddy, if that.
Yeah.
And there's
Right.
nothing wrong with that. But I get my kicks being involved in a large group of people operating. I like to say that I'm more an operator than I am a modeler. I mean, I can lay track, I can do scenery, I can do that, but it's not really my forte. It's not where I get my kicks in the hobby. I love to operate. You could put heck, you can make a Brio train set, and as long as you operated it prototypically, I'm good.
Well, yeah. Well, you said you were into operating. You said just a few moments ago that you've been operating since 16 or 17 years old?
Yeah, I would say I got involved actively in the hobby with a model railroad club when I was about 16, but it wasn't until I was 17, probably 18, when I got involved through the Teen Association of Model Railroading, and I got invited to a very large layout here in North Jersey that took about 20 to 30 people to run.
Wow.
And run.
Oh, big club. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a home layout. And
oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Who unfortunately, I mean, this little story I'll tell. It was Harold Worthwine and his Erie layout. It was on, I believe, the cover of the 60th anniversary of Model Railroader and various other times and other magazines. But that's where I cut my teeth on it. And I unfortunately, we lost Harold a couple of years ago, age of 98.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Good run.
Yeah. And, we had the unfortunate task of spending two of the hottest weekends, and I would say it was 2021 or 22, whichever was just after the COVID shutdown.
Yeah.
I can't remember which year it was, but anyway,
one of those years, they're all a blur now. Yeah.
We tore that thing down piece by piece, and it was built old school. It was built solid because he was a carpenter for Picatinny Arsenal here in New Jersey. So he built his layout the old school way, hard shell scenery and tons of wood and tons of big wood. And, I had the honor of being able to save some of the cars and buildings from the layout. Friends of the layout got, certain pieces of it. And
sure.
So I was, I'm very honored to have some buildings that were on the layout now residing on mine. So it's nice to have that kind of continuity, that memory. The memory lives on.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. It's great to be able to, hang on to that and be able to relive those memories and include it into what you have of your own. Prior to age 16, what got you into the hobby? When did you discover model railroading?
Oh, gee. I mean, my dad had, the requisite Lionel train around the Christmas tree. And I couldn't tell you what year I became aware of trains, but I always liked them. I was always in love and wanted to go see them. But when I was in middle school back in the early 80s, I found a friend who was a year older, and that's when I started rail fanning. And I was at the point where New Jersey Transit was phasing out some of I didn't know it at the time, but they were phasing out some of their motive power from pre-Conrail. And I watched the end of that whole thing, and it really just ballooned from there. I always joke with Dave that, that's why I hate Conrail, because Conrail, took over all my favorite railroads, which I never saw because I was 6 in 1976. I was actually 5 when Conrail occurred. And, so I never saw the Erie Lackawanna or the Penn Central, the Reading or the Jersey Central spin a single wheel. But all my early train books were all of those railroads. So I just, I fell in love with them. And until I met Dave 7-8 years ago, Conrail, ugly blue engines.
Isn't it funny how that progression works? Like you have those folks that, you mentioned those predecessor railroads, and, the Conrail comes along and it's like, oh, and then now you talk to some guys and you're like, yeah, I love NS and this and that. And we got a guy in our group that would be like, oh, that's junk compared to Big Blue. Big Blue is where it was at, and Conrail and this and that. And Dave would be one of those guys, right? Conrail was where it was at. So yeah, and it's funny. Maybe someday some merger acquisition will happen, and they'll be like, they'll mention this new railroad, and I'll be like, nah, NS and CSX was where it was at. And it's just funny how that all goes down the line, like in that fashion.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a 7-year age difference between Dave and myself, so I get why he likes what he likes. That's what he grew up watching. Yeah. And I really didn't grow up watching Conrail because he lived near a main line. He could see big mainline freights with big mainline power. I lived on a little dinky branch line that we were lucky if we saw a train once a month. So Conrail to me was just, this little, piddly squat railroad, to use a technical term. But yeah, I've gotten to understand that it was a pretty cool railroad. It had some really cool operations, some cool engines. I do prefer the early years when things were all patched up and ratty looking, and they still had cool second generation units before they became the railroad of SDs, 60s, and 50s, and wide cabs and all that kind of stuff. But it's funny how it all comes full circle.
Yeah, for sure. And, definitely those younger years, the impressionable years, the things that we remember and things that are important to us. And yeah, maybe impressionable years can shift a little bit. I think maybe I was more impressionable about what I model in my early 20s than I was a kid. But the things that you remember growing up is still like, tugs at the heartstrings. It's important to you.
Oh, absolutely. I grew up by the Susquehanna and up in my part of New Jersey. So I saw the rebirth of the main line through Northwest Jersey, the stack trains, the early years of that with the Burlington Northern power, and even early CSX power. I remember seeing a train that had a patched B&O GP40 and a Family Lines GP40 in it, and it was just a riot of paint schemes. But of course, it doesn't occur to you then what you're seeing. You're just, oh, I know it's a cool train, and those engines don't run around here, but here we are now in 2024, and God, if I could go back and see that again, that would be so cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah. The shifting golden years is the other one I keep talking about, right? It's like, that moment that you're in right now is going to be a golden era to somebody. Yeah. It's funny. Like, imagine the people that would want to go back and love to see all that patched chassis system stuff, and the Family Line stuff patch going through. It's like that's an era gone by now, and boy, I'd love to. We got to get a DeLorean, just go back in time and be able to relive all this stuff, right?
This is true.
That'd be a blast. Yeah,
absolutely.
So we get to do it in our modeling, and I guess that's the closest we get to be able to kind of protest the passage of time.
True.
Operations, you talk about getting into it early. What did you know of it prior to getting in with this gentleman that had that layout?
Well, like I said, kids of that generation, we like I said, we lived and died by Model Railroader magazine, and I believe I don't think I had ever seen it in print. I don't believe it had been in print by that point, and like I said, I was looking for ways to get involved in the hobby. That's what drew me to the TAMR. And it was just an invite. He was like, he lived in New York State. He was like, hey, there's this layout not far from you. I'll get you an invite and we'll run. And I guess I really just took to it, like a fish to water, and jumped in head first or feet first, or whatever the saying is. And I've just always loved it. It's just, to me, I don't get my kicks just watching a train go around in a circle. I mean, it has its place.
Sure.
It can be very relaxing, but I remember going to clubs when I was a kid, and I'm seeing it through a child's eyes, and trains just running all over the place. But as I got older, I realized, and I read enough that, trains have a purpose. Trains go from point A to point B. So that's where I think it was just a matter of just learning more about railroading and learning more about obviously model railroading and what you can and what you can't do. And I love, I'm a big fan of the OPSIG. I've written articles for the dispatcher's office on operations, and to me, I'm always looking to make my op session experience wherever I go more involved. Just because, not because I get bored, but because I just find it fun, and I try to involve my fellow operators in it. Some of my friends are into taking it to the next level with me, and some are really like, it's too much. I just want to operate, with the basics, and that's fine, But I like to, I guess, push the envelope.
Yeah, so you're more into like that more advanced operations. You really like to get into it, and then some more of the uber detail of it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess from an early age, I was, I was involved in knowing what car cards and waybills were, and then that went to timetable and train order. So, and now with Dave's, it's all signal indication. And I will admit, I don't, it's green, it's red, it's yellow. The combinations, they're lost on me. But, it's a different kind of railroading, and his car forwarding is different than, it's not separate waybills. It's a switch list, and you switch by blocks. You don't switch by, separate cars.
Where did that take you? You talk about, this gentleman, and I apologize. Probably should have wrote his name down. What was the name of this gentleman that you hooked up with in your teens?
Tom Matthews, who is unfortunately another, gentleman who has gone to the big roundhouse in the sky. But, he took me under his wing. His own son really wasn't involved in hobby. So I guess he was like a scout leader for the TAMR in this part of the country. So we just palled around, and we used to rail fan, Orange County, New York. And that's how I learned where all the railroads were and everything. And we would go on adventures, both rail fanning adventures and just driving around looking at abandoned railroad beds. He was a pilot in Vietnam. So we would go to one of the local airports up there, and we'd just fly over New York State, and you could see a lot more from the air than, So
it was an awesome opportunity. Yeah,
it was. It was really cool. Of course, for the it was hard because I wouldn't get airsick, but I'd be like, with this little Piper Cub, and I'm like, can we land now?
Yeah. But still, especially back then, the perspective. I'm fortunate to have a drone that can pop up and look at some areas, but to be able to fly over in that era and be able to see it from the air. And I'm a big fan of ghost railroading, and it sounds like that was something you got to do as well. Be able to see where things used to be, and let your imagination run wild as to what may have been there at one point.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. New Jersey is full of those, especially the northwestern part of the state where I'm from. And I've always gotten more of a kick walking an abandoned railroad bed than I ever did sitting along an active one and waiting for a train to show up, because it was just like I would take one of my books and I'd go there and I'd see what was there and just explore and I guess be in the moment and let your mind fill in the gaps. And it's still my favorite thing to do. And a lot of them, when I was growing up, my dad and I would go hiking, but a lot of them were unimproved. They were just trails at that point in the woods. And now the state has come along and they've improved all these old road beds, and the bridges are decked, and the road, the sub road bed is nice and graded. It's not a ruddy, muddy path, and there's no trees to hack through. So it's definitely a great time to do that. And one of my friends, he's mountain biked a good portion of them all. So
wow. That's very cool. Yeah, it's always fun to travel, and then you find where a spur was, or you can kind of like, I wonder where it tied into the current main line, and then you can kind of look at Google Maps is kind of the best worst thing that could happen, because you can spend hours just falling down that wormhole.
Absolutely.
of looking at old rail bed for hours.
Absolutely. I mean, well, I kind of did that when we first talked. We spent a good 15 minutes just looking at Google Maps, and you taught me about, parts of Connecticut that, I mean, I've sort of been in that part of the state, but I don't really know where things quite went. And I know them from maps in a book. especially like that one wreck that I was telling you about that was up near the Rhode Island border on the New Haven. And,
Yeah.
it's just, to me, it's just a place on a map, but I would like to just go there one day.
Combine Google Maps, especially if up here in New England, combine that with Ronald Dale Carr's book, The Rail Lines of Southern New England, and you are just absolutely in trouble. Your day will go right on by you with the combination of those two books.
I do have one. I believe there's 2 volumes, right? I think I have one of the volumes. Yeah.
I think a buddy of his did the
other
Northern New England, and then he did Southern New England or something like that. But yeah, and I'd love to have it, but boy, I'd be down. I would probably have to, I'd put out a podcast once every 3 months if you gave me one of New York State, because New York State, I mean, just absolutely fascinating. Like you said, between New Jersey and New York, the amount of railroad that used to be there.
Oh, wow. I mean, my dream is to one day explore I guess it's Dutchess County, everything north of Poughkeepsie, all those old they're the predecessors to the predecessor of the New Haven, all up through that, from from the Boston and Albany down to Poughkeepsie. There were just railroads on top of railroads through the middle, and it's still pretty much the middle of nowhere today. And that stuff just fascinates me to no end.
All this fascination for older railroads. I mean, we talk about what you're modeling now, the Lehigh Valley Harbor Terminal. How did you get to that path? What led you down that road to the Lehigh Valley Harbor Terminal?
That's funny, because I grew up in Northwest New Jersey, nowhere near the Hudson River, nowhere near Jersey City, New Jersey. That was the other side of the world as far as I was concerned growing up. And, the Lehigh Valley, being one of the Conrail predecessors, always held an interest to me. And I guess it was, I had gone to Hoboken when I was just starting the rail fan, and Hoboken was the old Erie Lackawanna terminal, which is still there today. And I saw pictures and I was like, wow, this whole riverside, harborside thing is really neat. And I thought I could model that in a 5 by 10 foot space in HO when I got home. And I realized that, just because you can draw on a piece of paper doesn't mean that you can cram all that into a space, probably not even in Z scale.
Right.
So, I always had this latent interest in harbor railroading, but it wasn't until Walthers came out with their waterfront series, which was the car float and the float bridge and a couple of other things, the pier, the warehouse. And I said, wow, now I've got a way to model the waterfront, but what do I model? So I was always, again, a lot of the model railroads that I operated on were all prototype based, actual time and places in history. So I was like, I don't really want to come up with my own freelanced layout, though. Now, if I was to do it now, I probably would give myself a little freedom, but I didn't know about all the neat little pocket terminals that used to be in Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens. So I'm looking at the terminals on the New Jersey side of the river, and they're all acres and acres of track. No way you could model those in any kind of, even a decent sized basement. But until I found that the Lehigh Valley in Jersey City had this very, very narrow, and when I say narrow, it was only a couple hundred yards wide, and it was maybe about 2-3 miles long. I could easily condense all the interesting parts of that yard, which were the float bridges and a couple piers, into what I had in my basement when I was still living at home. And again, I realized there that I couldn't do that. So when I finally bought my own house, I had now 3-4 times the room to do that. And I had about 11 foot wide by about 22 foot long area. And I was able to reasonably condense all of that into that space. So I realized, I'm getting more involved in the hobby. This is like going back like 20 years ago, and when I first started it. And I realized that, what I could do, what I couldn't do, what looked reasonable, what really didn't look reasonable. And I was always very concerned about ergonomics. And by that, I mean people room.
Right.
I didn't want to have to, cram into a spot. So my aisleways and whatnot and reach zones are, I would say, pretty generous in the way that, you don't have to stretch or cram yourself into a spot.
Very, very important. Yeah, they're very important things to keep in mind when you are designing a railroad. If you want to make sure that you have some operator comfort, yeah, you want to make sure that you have that room and don't overbuild to a point where you're going to cram your operators in.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure we've all been at layouts where, the builder gets a little overzealous in a spot or two, and there's always going to be a pinch point somewhere on the layout.
Sure,
it's
sure.
inevitable. It is inevitable. I've never not been to a layout that isn't like that. Some are worse than others. So having been to so many layouts, I kind of took that knowledge when it was time to build mine, and I really tried to be cognizant of that fact. And I think so far it's worked out pretty well for me. I mean, if I was to do it over again, I wouldn't have the sea of track that I have. It's a terminal layout. It's a switching layout. It's a big yard with a couple of industrial tracks leading off of it. So there's no main line running. There's, it's just, track here, track there, track everywhere. So, I think if I were to tear it down tomorrow and rebuild it, I'd do a completely different kind of a layout.
Well, it's kind of neat. I think to me, it's a little fascinating that you've decided on the type of railroading that you wanted to do and then went out and found the prototype. Because most guys are like, okay, I love Conrail and I'm going to create a Conrail, or I'm going to create a CSX, or I'm going to create a BNSF or whatever. But you kind of like, I know what I want. And then you went out and you found a prototype that kind of matched what you wanted versus the other way around.
Yeah. Like I said, I have a great imagination as far as coming up with ideas of different layouts that I could want to ever build. And some are proto-freelanced, some are totally made up, mostly usually proto-freelance, because, you always want to have something that you can't have. If you're a strict prototype modeler, yeah, but I really like, SD35s, and, your particular prototype didn't run SD35s. So, it's kind of like that, but I had all these, I was a voracious collector of maps and photographs, and I just took all of that, your Sanborn maps, your railroad valuation maps, Port Authority aerials, and I just really tried as best as possible to match the track geometry and the different, I guess what Tony Kuster would call layout design elements. So that was important to me, because I wanted people to come to the basement and go, oh wow, I know where that is, or oh, I know where that was, because I don't think there's not very many people left who remember Jersey City the way it was, because Conrail took over in 76 and all that stuff was leveled by like 1978. Yeah.
So that's again, you've taken this idea and you mentioned all this research that you've been able to do. Talk about that process, like learning about this and gathering all that kind of stuff, the maps and everything else. How did you get your hands on that?
Well, it's funny, people, I've been invited to do talks about the Lehigh Valley across New Jersey for various historical societies over the years. And I always felt really funny, because sure, I've got all this information, but I never saw the railroad. I've never been to some of these places, but I've collected all this book knowledge, basically, is what I call it, book knowledge. There's lots of great books on the Lehigh Valley. I'm sitting next to my entire, bookshelf right now as I say this. But, eBay at one time, many generations ago, was a great way to actually connect, because you could see who you were bidding against or buying from. And that's how I met a lot of people. I actually met an ex-employee who worked, he and his father both worked in Jersey City. And when stuff would come up, we would, we kind of made like a gentleman's agreement. Oh, if I win that, I'll make copies for you. And if you win that, you make copies for me. And it was a great, and I did that with a bunch of different people who I never met. And I guess all that stuff was, maybe unfortunately, a lot of people maybe back in the 90s had passed away around then, and their stuff had become liquidated and went out on the market, because at one time it was just all over the place. And you very rarely ever come across a lot of that stuff now.
Amazing. And networking through eBay. Who
Yeah,
knew?
yeah, it was a thing, and like I said, I wouldn't have probably half of what I have if it wasn't because of, like I said, just making eBay friends as opposed to Facebook friends. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it got you what you needed, and it was able to, be able to connect and share that information. And I think it sounds like you're really passionate about it. That the history behind it is really cool.
yeah. I mean, gosh, I could talk, anybody's ear off for hours and pull out maps and go, "Well, this used to go here," and all that kind of stuff. And I quickly realized that sometimes I'm not necessarily talking over people's heads, but like a frame of reference is always important. Like, a lot about upper New York State and Connecticut because, well, that's where you lived. And to me, Connecticut, yes, I know, I've been there. I know what railroads ran through there, but I don't know the intricacies of it all, especially in the Hartford, New Haven area. I mean, gosh, there's so many lines just radiating out of those, out of those towns.
Sure.
And it's the same thing with New York Harbor. You had all these major trunk lines. Yeah, sure. People know the Pennsylvania Railroad. They know the New York Central, the Erie, the Lackawanna, the B&O, but they don't, necessarily know that there were these entire railroad navies that served all these little pieces and parts of New York. And it's like you said earlier, it's a rabbit hole that you could go really far down. And I did go really far into it, and which is why I have what I have. But yeah, it can be a bit much.
Yeah, I bet. And with, you got this plethora of information that you've been able to gather and you have in your mind. And through all of that, I'll ask you, what was the most surprising thing you learned about the Lehigh Valley's operation?
Gee, that's a great question, and one that is, I think, kind of, it's a little bit tough to answer. I mean, it was the interrelationship between all the other harbor railroads. I don't mean to keep gravitating back to just that part of the Lehigh Valley, because I've learned a bunch of other things about the Lehigh Valley as far as operations go. And, the coal traffic, especially even the passenger traffic, that really was, as far as the Lehigh Valley was concerned, amongst all the other railroads in New Jersey, like the Pennsy, the Jersey Central, the Erie, the Lackawanna, who had these huge commuter operations. The Lehigh Valley really didn't. They really did not have a very huge operation, especially as far as commuter service goes. They were the Johnny-come-latelys to this part of New Jersey, and you already had the Pennsy on one to the south and the Jersey Central to the north, and they had everything pretty well, taken care of by that time. Yeah, I mean, it just, living in South Plainfield, New Jersey, which is where I live now, it was originally a very big coal marshaling yard. And I enjoy local history just as much as I do railroad history. And I've, enjoyed learning about why this was such a pivotal spot on the railroad. It was a big yard it was a yard that had it was a giant Y that had a yard in the middle of it. And then there were actually 2 or 3 other little Ys within the big Y. And I just, not many places like that on too many railroads, and especially not here in New Jersey. It's just those little interesting nuancy things. But that's the stuff I love to learn about, the stuff that most people either don't know. Well, I say that to say that's kind of wrong, but
the inside baseball stuff, right? That stuff that you may not see on the surface is really
exactly. I didn't want to make it sound like, oh, I know something you don't know, but it's not that. I enjoy, helping other people learn about the intricacies of it all.
Absolutely. So you got all this knowledge applied in your head, and you've mentioned that your Lehigh Valley Harbor Terminal is a multi-year project, right? You've been working on this for quite some time. Tell us about how you got it started.
Well, we moved in back in 2022, I believe, and around there, and I instantly, started plotting and scheming, much to my girlfriend's chagrin. And, I'm a procrastinator. I'm a serial procrastinator, if there is such a thing. And I
Yes,
got
there is.
I got the bench work up pretty quickly. Now, I did all of that by myself. When it got to putting in DCC, I got my friends involved because even though my father worked for New Jersey Bell, he did not really ever impart the whole idea of wiring very well to me. I never took to it. So I had them come do the DCC installation, and I'm good with laying track and all of that kind of stuff. There's many things I would again, like all of us, go back and do differently. And a lot of us now, with this community that we have here, we all help each other on projects. And if I had known, well, I did know some of the people, but I think if the community had been a little bit different, as far as a lot of my friends now are either retired, so they have all this time to help each other out, and we have new people in the group, like Dave. And if had that all been in place, in the early 2000s, I would have had more people, more hands on the layout. It's just like it's like anything else. You have a house and things need to get done. And I'm also a musician, so I was very involved with that, doing that. I still am. And and other unfortunate life things happened, and things got dumped on the layout, and then things got cleared off the layout, and things got dumped back on the layout. And so it's a basement.
It's a familiar story, Ralph. It sure is.
Yeah. I believe me. I don't think I'm special in that regard.
No, you're not. No, don't feel alone. That's the key part. I jokingly said, I have a layout somewhere down in my basement. Luckily I found it lately, but it took me a while to dig it back out. And I'm resisting burying it again with all the other projects that happened. So I can definitely feel your pain on that. But so you get started. You have kind of an idea with all this information and research. You picked 1951. Tell us why you picked 1951.
Well, I don't think at first it was I don't think the reason that it has now was really the reason why I did it back then. But 1951 was pretty much the heyday of the marine operations. It's about the time where the Lehigh Valley, being the Lehigh Valley, purchased their diesel tugboats, which I forgot to mention was also part of the Walthers release. It's the exact prototype for the Lehigh Valley tugboats that they bought in the 1950s, 6 of them, as a matter of fact. And also, it turns out that's the year that my father graduated high school. And I don't think I picked 51 because of that at the time. I think it was a happy accident. I always toyed with the 50s. That was just the period that I felt comfortable modeling. It didn't require any steam engines. Just basically, that's roughly my favorite time of history to model. And it just worked out well that was in line with what the Lehigh Valley was doing then. So, yeah, I think now more than anything, it's it ties to my father, and like I said, just it ended up I guess killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah, like you said, a happy accident or a good coincidence, and kind of gives us some significance and meaning too. So. Exactly. And its heyday, that you said, the heyday of that railroad, right?
Yeah, it was. I think it was pretty much. It was the last gasp of the railroad before things really took a downturn in the early '60s. The Pensy asserted more control over the Lehigh Valley, and basically the entire Northeast Railroad system was headed towards 1976. There's really no denying that. So yeah. It was really just the penultimate time to model that part of the Lehigh Valley's history.
You mentioned you're an operations guy, and I'm sure you've headed that way with your layout. What does operations look like? What's the operations on the Lehigh Valley Harbor Terminal?
Well, so really most of the cars that operate on the layout, they're either coming in on a car float, and then they're just leaving immediately to go into staging. So I felt that I didn't need, the typical 4-cycle waybill and car card, or even the more modern two-cycle that Tony Custer uses, Tony Thompson, that has become very popular. The more realistic looking car card system. You know, it really looks like a little miniature waybill.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was as great, as awesome as that is, because it looks like the real thing. I didn't need that. I didn't need all that information. My guys are just concerned about, you know, 10 feet in that direction or 10 feet in that direction and off the layout. And now, of course, you've got local cars because there's local industries. So how do you deal with that? I took another page from Keith Jordan, who is a modeler, I believe, out in the Midwest, and also Tony Thompson, his blog, his Southern Pacific blog. And there were a thing called car cards, routing cards. And those are the things that you would see them tacking on the little wooden tack boards on boxcar or any kind of car's side. And it was basically in a terminal operation that was a routing card, just basically saying this car goes to Oak Island Yard, which is my off layout staging to the west. Nobody needs to know that the car eventually is going to Buffalo or Kansas City or Savannah, Georgia. They just need to know, does it go right or does it go left, which is east and west.
Right.
It's realistic. It's simple. It's simple without being dumbed down. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but you know, there are lots of great systems. Some, and they work great. They're not my cup of tea. I'm not a big fan of color coding, though it's a great idea. Everybody does everything different, and that's
Sure.
that's what makes the hobby great. But I wanted something that was it was a realistic analog, as well as, hey, it's so easy a caveman could do it, you know. So yeah, I mean that and switch lists. I've operated on switch lists a couple times. Just recently in California on a gentleman who was modeling basically not Santa Fe, as I was going to say Santa Fe, San Francisco's version of all these little pocket terminals that once existed in New York City. It's the State Belt Railroad. It ran from like just below not even really below the Golden Gate, but that area where if you're familiar with San Francisco, the ferry terminal around that area. Basically, the part of San Francisco that got wiped out during the fire after the earthquake.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to visit the south end of that when I was in San Francisco earlier this year, and of course, today's San Francisco it's clean, it's tidy, it's been gentrified, much like parts of New York that were very gritty at one time.
Right.
But it was a neat model railroad I've always wanted to operate on, and you operated the layout via switch list. You know, they had a guy sitting at a desk, and he used car cards so he could keep track of where things were going. But you never saw those separate waybills. You just were handed a switch list, and it said this car goes to this place, and this car gets picked up and brought over to this yard, and you know, two separate, an inbound and an outbound switch list. But as long as you have somebody willing to be that person, and I do have friends who are willing to take that sit down job. Yeah, so that's the way I plan to, when I get back up and operating, to really get into it like that. And I just, again, very realistic. It's the way they did it, and I'm trying to eliminate as much. And I love paperwork, but I'm trying to eliminate as much as possible. That's my other collecting, is I love to collect waybills and tariffs and routing books. It's, you know, again, it's just like, it's all this information that it really starts to, you know, go ding, 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 ding all around in your head, because it's all these numbers and stuff that we can't ever really use. Of course, they needed it in the real world when they had armies of clerks, but
right.
It helps to come up with prototypical car routings and knowing what industries got what kind of cars and where they came from. So that's why I love collecting those kind of books.
So what would you say the state of your layout is right now?
Well, it's 100% built. I just have a little bit of wiring to do, a lot of house cleaning to do, and then ballast. And okay. I might as well just have like a giant truck come up to the basement window and put a chute in and just dump it and then spread it out, you know, like you would do to your backyard. But yeah, it's done. I just have to do a deep clean, and it's ready to more or less go. I was very lucky that I was out of work for 2 weeks when we had Hurricane Sandy here in Jersey. And so what did I do? Well, there was enough light coming through the basement windows, because we were out of power for 3 or 4 days. But I would sit in the basement with my entire car fleet, and I had all my wheel sets and all my Katy couplers and all my weights, and I sat there and I shopped 200 plus cars for the layout. So my car fleet is pretty ready to go. I don't have to go through all that. And in the last year or two, I've gotten a lot of DCC installations done on my fleet. So now I have more than enough engines to run a session, and they all have sound. And
yeah, so that was back in 2012. You've been plugging away at this, because Hurricane Sandy was 2012. So
yeah,
you've been plugging away for some time on this layout and knocking these tasks out. And yeah, that doesn't happen overnight, and especially when you're a busy guy and you got a ton of other stuff and other hobbies going. So, but you've stayed resilient to make sure that you get it done and keep moving forward with your project.
Exactly, and that's my problem, having too many axes in the on the grindstone, and it's just like I said, I get distracted easy.
Yeah, I'll tell you, if you want to make progress on a layout, come to a screeching halt, start a podcast. That'll do it. And I joke about that, but it doesn't, other hobbies, and hey, you're a diverse person, and well, I wish I could just drill down and stay focused on one thing, but I don't know. Yeah, but unfortunately I'm just one of those guys that, enjoys a multitude of different things and different types of projects. But the layout always is there, and it seems like model railroading, it's something that even if you leave it for a while, it's just always there for you to come back to.
Yeah, it's a great time to really be in this hobby. I mean, with all the great, all the great products, and like I said, the podcasts and the internet and everything. It's people say, oh, and I'm sure they've always been saying it long before you and I were in the hobby, and they'll say it long after we're gone. Oh, the hobby's dying, and the hobby's dying. No, it's not dying. It's constantly changing, but I think it's changing for the better.
Yeah, it's going through an evolution, and again, we've had this conversation on the podcast before, and if your thing was, I don't know, older DC, I don't even know. I'm not even going to get myself trapped in this by saying, but if you used a much older technology with older things, and yeah, maybe you do think that the hobby's dying because it's not that anymore, but it's evolving into something different. And it's just becoming, with more technology being added and the advancement of 3D printing, that's just helping everybody's projects move along a lot better. And trying to scratch build everything on your layout. Now you've got some opportunity to move it forward, and life is busier than it was 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, it was busier than the 20 years before that. So
absolutely,
there's just so much going on, so much of out there to have to do or available to do. So all these advancements are just going to help the hobby continue to move along.
I couldn't agree more. Every year when we go to Springfield, there's always something new and interesting in the hobby to see. I mean, just I'll pick one thing, the proto throttle. I know it's been out for a couple of years now, but I mean, what, 10 years ago, we never would have even dreamed of something like that. And now look what we have,
Oh yeah.
It's stuff like that. But last year, the 3D printing, the cars, even Bowser doing the RS3 projects. I mean, that stuff wasn't even, you couldn't even fathom of it 10 years, let alone 20 years ago. I mean,
right. Yeah, we're definitely heading in the right direction. And one of the best advancements has been able to build networks, from Facebook to apparently eBay. Like I've learned tonight that you could have one time networked on eBay. But one of the people in your network you mentioned is also a person who does these pocket terminals, and you have a kind of a connection to him that you're looking to advance. And that's Dave Ramos. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Dave and I have been friends for easily 20, 25 years. He's modeling literally the Manhattan side of the Lehigh Valley. They had a pocket terminal right on the west side of Manhattan, and he chose to model that. and the Eries, which was the next block north, and the surrounding New York Central lines, the High Line that many people who are somewhat familiar with Manhattan might be familiar with as a walking path through, down the west side of Manhattan now. And
Right.
he built that around the edge of his basement with the 2 pocket terminals in the middle. And gosh, he just celebrated his. He's going to kill me if he hears this and I get it wrong, but he did let's put it here. I know how to say it. He celebrated a milestone anniversary just last year. I think it was last year. Yeah. And he's still going strong. And he's like me. He's like, oh, I'm going to tear it all down. I'm sick of this. I do the same thing. But he's still plugging away. He bought himself a laser cutter, and he is now in the process of doing all the very fine iron work that lined that entire elevated structure. And really, the only way he was going to do that would be 3D printing, which would probably take twice as long and maybe not be as intricate, as nice as he's doing. He's got the burner that is actually burning it out of that very thin special kind of plywood. I don't know the details of it all. I just know that he's doing it. I've seen test shots of it, and it looks awesome. And it really brings.
And it probably smells good too, because when they burn anything, they burn wood. It makes it smell like a campfire. It smells awesome.
Yeah, and he was a big proponent of handling everything. So when Fast Tracks came out and was a big thing when it first came out, everything was most of the layout is all hand laid track, and it's a giant labor of love. And he had a group of every week we would go there, and it would be a group of anywhere between 4 to 7 or 8 of us, and that's why he got so much done in such a short amount of time. And we've been operating that layout for I'd say a good decade, and it's just, it's another fun layout. And that's the problem. That's the other problem that I don't get anything done, is because I've got all these layouts to go operate on. It's like, I'll be there. You have me? I'll be there. And I don't get anything done on my layout.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that those are good problems to have when you have a great network like you've got down there in New Jersey, and the folks that you're connected with and the help that you get. You mentioned that too. And, that's one thing. If you're looking to build a layout and, what size you're going to go to, and this may be a topic we're going to have to cover in a podcast, but things you got to think about. But one of them is your support group and how many people you've got around you. And when you've got a great support group like you've got, I mean, then you can really go to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't conceive of, most of the layouts that are in my sphere of operating, they all need, a minimum of 10 people, and that's that's understaffed. Wow. Dave Ramos's layout needs see the way he designed his layout. You could operate it with 2 people, or you could operate it with as many as 15 people. Wow. Dave Abeliz's needs a minimum of 13 to 15 people.
Wow.
And the list goes on. The layouts only get bigger from the 2 Daves. So, and I'm in the middle size wise between Dave R and Dave A. And like I said, then the layouts just get orders of magnitude bigger.
Well, that's awesome. Great area you got. And, really neat to hear about your Lehigh Valley Harbor Terminal and having you on the show and getting to know you a little bit more, Ralph, and how you got into the hobby, and certainly all the interesting stuff you've learned about the Lehigh Valley along the way. And I'm glad you were able to come on and share that with us.
I really appreciate it. I had a great time. I'm almost kind of sorry that we can't drag this on longer, but that's a good thing. You don't want to, you don't want to give it all away in the first shot. So
no, there'll be more of Ralph. We'll have you back on for sure. And we'll get to learn more about that as you progress and get that big truckload of ballast dumped down your window so you can start spreading that around on your layout. And look forward to that. We'll share all of the links to Ralph's Lehigh Valley Harbor Terminal. That'll be at aroundthelayout.com/122. So check that out there. And until next time, Ralph, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.